I am Gemma, 33 years old, and I recently orchestrated the complete financial and social ruin of my own family. It started on a perfectly sunny Saturday at what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. I was hosting a lavish baby shower for my best friend Rachel at her stunning new $1.2 million estate. The champagne was flowing, the string quartet was playing, and everyone was smiling. Then my husband David grabbed my arm, pulled me into the hallway out of sight, and whispered that we had to leave the house immediately. When I asked him why, he handed me a crumpled medical receipt and a bank wire transfer confirmation he had just found on Rachel's desk. I looked at the names on the papers, and the ground completely fell out from beneath me. The father of Rachel's baby was my older brother Leo, and the house we were standing in was bought with money stolen directly from my business accounts. Before I reveal exactly how I used my event planning skills and my husband's forensic accounting expertise to trap them all, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. To understand how completely devastating this betrayal was, you have to understand the dynamic of my life. I run a highly successful luxury event planning company. Over the last decade, I built my business from the ground up, designing million-dollar experiences for high-profile corporate clients and wealthy families. My husband David is a 35-year-old forensic accountant for a major financial firm. His entire career is built on finding the truth, hidden in complex numbers, tracking down digital paper trails, and spotting the tiny anomalies that everyone else misses. I should have known that his sharp eyes would be the catalyst for exposing the ugliest secrets my family was hiding. Rachel and I had known each other since college. While I worked 80-hour weeks to build my company, Rachel had always hovered in my periphery, working entry-level jobs, subtly mimicking my choices, and constantly complaining about her lack of luck. When she suddenly announced she had purchased a luxury home in an exclusive suburb and was expecting a baby as a single mother via a sperm donor, I was genuinely thrilled for her. I wanted to celebrate her new chapter, so I offered to plan and fund her extravagant baby shower entirely for free. I brought in custom floral archways, a private catering team, and expensive party favors. I wanted everything to be perfect for the friend I thought had always supported me. The afternoon of the shower was flawless. My parents, Thomas and Barbara, were holding court near the extravagant gift table, laughing and pouring drinks for the guests. My older brother, Leo, the undisputed 36-year-old golden child of our family, was casually chatting up Rachel's friends. Leo had not held a steady job in 5 years, yet he walked around with the unearned confidence of a billionaire. That confidence was entirely funded by his wife, Naomi. Naomi is an incredibly brilliant African-American woman and a top-tier neurosurgeon at the city hospital. I absolutely adored my sister-in-law. She was a force of nature, working grueling 80-hour shifts and saving lives while completely funding Leo's lavish lifestyle. Despite Naomi's massive success and undeniable grace, my parents secretly resented her. Naomi had struggled with severe fertility issues, and because my parents harbored a toxic, outdated obsession with having a pure bloodline heir to carry on the family name, they viewed her as defective. They smiled in her face and spent her money, but behind closed doors they pitied Leo for being married to a woman who could not give them a grandson. I was standing near the patio doors watching Naomi generously hand Rachel an expensive cashmere baby blanket when David approached me. His grip on my elbow was unusually tight, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched near his ear. He pulled me away from the crowd, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth, as he told me we needed to go to our car right now. I tried to protest, reminding him that I was the host and could not just abandon my post, but the sheer gravity in his dark eyes left absolutely no room for argument. I followed him out the side gate, my heels clicking rapidly against the cobblestone driveway, until we reached the privacy of our SUV. The moment the heavy doors closed, shielding us from the ambient noise of the party, David reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. I went into the master bathroom to find some extra paper towels. David began, his voice dangerously low. Rachel's home office is attached to it. The door was open and a folder had spilled off her desk from the draft of the open window. When I picked it up, I saw the name on the letterhead. I did not mean to pry, Gemma, but the numbers just did not make sense. He handed me the first piece of paper. It was a formal receipt from an exclusive high-end fertility and prenatal clinic. My eyes scanned the sterile medical terminology until they landed on the bold black ink at the bottom of the page. Patient name Rachel Davis. Biological father and funder Leo Watson. The air in the car completely evaporated. Leo. My lazy, entitled, permanently unemployed brother was the father of Rachel's child, the same brother who was married to my brilliant sister-in-law. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of the betrayal. Rachel was carrying my brother's child, and she had invited Naomi to this party to shower her with gifts, smiling directly to her face while stealing her husband daily. Before I could even process the magnitude of this betrayal, David gently slid the second piece of paper over the first. "Keep looking, Gemma," he instructed quietly. "Look at the funding source." It was a bank statement, specifically a wire transfer confirmation for $250,000 designated as the down payment for Rachel's $1.2 million house. The funds had not come from Leo. Leo did not have 2 dimes to rub together. The funds had come from a business line of credit attached to my company, approved by a secondary co-signer, Thomas Watson, my father. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. A ringing sound started in my ears, drowning out the faint sound of the string quartet from the backyard. For a decade, my parents had treated me as the family workhorse. A month ago, my father had pleaded with me to temporarily leave him on the legal framework of my LLC as a co-signer, claiming he needed to show business affiliations for a tax benefit. I had trusted him, and he had used that trust to bypass my primary security protocols, siphoning $250,000 of my hard-earned money to buy a luxury house for my brother's mistress. "They know," I whispered, the horrific realization washing over me like ice water. "My parents. They know Rachel is carrying Leo's child. They paid for this house with my money to hide her." "It is wire fraud," Gemma, David said, his forensic accountant mind already 10 steps ahead. He bypassed the corporate limits by forging a verbal authorization code. "This is not just family drama. It is a federal crime." I looked out the tinted window of the SUV, staring at the manicured hedges of the house my money had secretly bought. Inside that house, my parents were drinking champagne. Inside that house, Rachel was opening gifts. Inside that house, Naomi, who worked grueling 80-hour weeks as a neurosurgeon to afford Leo's lavish lifestyle, was smiling, completely unaware that her husband had used my family to finance his betrayal. Most people would have stormed back in there screaming. Most people would have thrown a glass of champagne in Rachel's face and demanded their money back. But as I sat in the quiet of the car, looking at the irrefutable printed proof of their absolute moral bankruptcy, the shock faded. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. "I am going back inside," I said, handing the papers back to David. "Gemma, you do not have to face them right now," he protested. "We have the evidence. We can go straight to the authorities." "No," I replied, my voice chillingly steady. I adjusted my dress and checked my reflection in the visor mirror, making sure my makeup was flawless. "If I blow this up now, they will spin it. My mother will cry. My father will make excuses, and they will try to gaslight Naomi into forgiving him. They want a celebration. I will give them one, but on my terms." I stepped out of the car, the warm afternoon sun mocking the absolute zero temperature of my blood. As I walked back through the side gate and into the sprawling backyard, the scene before me had shifted from a picture-perfect suburban gathering to a grotesque theater of lies. I paused near the floral archway I had personally designed and paid for, simply observing the people who were supposed to love me. There was my mother, Barbara, holding a crystal flute, her designer dress impeccable. She was laughing loudly at a joke Leo had just made. My father, Thomas, stood beside them, looking every bit the proud patriarch. They were the architects of this deception. Because Naomi had struggled with fertility issues, my parents had quietly and ruthlessly deemed her defective. It did not matter that Naomi was a top-tier neurosurgeon. It did not matter that she was a brilliant, compassionate African-American woman who paid their son's credit card bills. To Thomas and Barbara, she was merely a utility, a wallet to sustain Leo, until he could fulfill his duty elsewhere. And there was Naomi. She was standing by the gift table dressed in a stunning emerald green dress, looking exhausted but genuinely happy. She was holding a tiny, expensive cashmere baby blanket she had bought for Rachel. My chest tightened painfully. Naomi was the sister I had always wanted. We had bonded over being the ambitious, hard-working women in a family that only valued lazy men. Seeing her smile at Rachel, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband's illegitimate child was sitting in the guest of honor's womb, was a physical blow. I took a deep breath, composing my features into an impenetrable mask, and walked over to the patio where Thomas, Barbara, and Leo were gathered, away from the main crowd. "Gemma, darling, where did you run off to?" Barbara chirped, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. "The caterers were asking about the dessert schedule. You really should not abandon your post when you are hosting. David had a slight migraine. I was just getting him some medication from the car." I lied smoothly. I stepped closer to the three of them, my voice dropping an octave, keeping my tone strictly conversational so the surrounding guests would not suspect a thing. "But since we have a quiet moment, I wanted to ask you something, Dad." Thomas puffed out his chest. "Of course. What is it?" "I was just reviewing some automated alerts from my business accounts," I said, watching his eyes carefully. "It seems there was a wire transfer initiated 3 weeks ago. $250,000. The authorization code traces back to your secondary access." The silence that fell over the four of us was deafening. Leo's smug smile vanished instantly. Barbara's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Thomas, however, simply hardened his jaw, annoyed rather than ashamed. "This is not the time or place for business talk," Gemma Thomas said in a hushed, sharp whisper. "I think it is the perfect time," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Considering we are standing in the backyard of a $1.2 million home that was purchased using those exact funds. For Rachel. For Leo's child." Barbara gasped softly, glancing around frantically to see if anyone had overheard. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. Leo took a step forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me, a tactic that had worked when we were children, but was entirely pathetic now. "Listen, Gemma, it is complicated. Rachel and I, it just happened. Naomi cannot give us a kid. You know how much Mom and Dad want a grandson. So you steal $250,000 from my company to buy your mistress a house?" I asked, looking directly into my father's eyes. Thomas did not look away. The sheer arrogance of his entitlement was staggering. "I did not steal anything. I am a co-signer on that account. That is family money, Gemma. You have been hoarding your wealth while your brother needed to secure a future for his heir. Naomi cannot give this family what it needs. Rachel did. I simply reallocated family resources to protect my grandson's future. You should be happy to contribute." "Family money," I repeated, the clinical detachment in my voice unsettling them. "I built my company from the ground up while you paid off Leo's gambling debts. I worked 80-hour weeks while Leo sat on Naomi's couch. My LLC is a corporate entity, Dad, not your personal piggy bank." "Do not be selfish," Barbara chimed in, her voice dripping with venomous justification. "You have plenty of money. We needed to make sure Rachel was comfortable and that Naomi did not find out. If Naomi divorces Leo, he will lose everything. We had to be discreet. You have a duty to this family, Gemma." I looked at these people who shared my DNA. There was no remorse, no apology, only a chilling expectation that I should willingly finance my brother's infidelity and my own financial ruin simply because I was born the daughter the workhorse meant to pave the way for the golden son. "My duty is to my own family," I said softly, holding my ground. "To my husband and the employees who depend on my business to feed their children. Not to Leo's reckless mistakes." Thomas took a step forward, closing the distance between us. his broad shoulders trying to cast an intimidating shadow over my face. It is not a mistake, Gemma. It is a calculated decision, a necessary course correction for this family. Do you honestly think I just stumbled through your corporate banking portal? I spent 3 weeks learning the override protocols you set up. I impersonated you on the phone with the commercial branch manager. I verified your security questions using details only a father would know. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I would do it again without hesitation. He was practically bragging about committing federal wire fraud. The sheer hubris of his confession was suffocating. He genuinely believed that his position as my father granted him absolute immunity from the law and from basic morality. "And Naomi?" I asked, my voice dangerously even testing the depths of their depravity. "What is your calculated decision for her? She works herself to the bone as a neurosurgeon to provide Leo with a life of luxury. She trusts all of you." Barbara scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if we were discussing a broken appliance rather than a brilliant human being. "Naomi is a wonderful provider. We are not denying that. But a marriage requires children, Gemma, real children to carry on the family name. Naomi has failed in her primary biological duty. She is just a stepping stone now. As long as she remains in the dark, Leo can maintain his lifestyle, and Rachel can raise the true heir in comfort. Once the baby is born and Leo is properly established, we will figure out the divorce logistics. Until then, Naomi serves her purpose. She is an investment just like your business." My stomach churned violently. The absolute depravity of their logic was staggering. They were using an incredibly accomplished African-American woman as nothing more than a human automated teller machine to fund their outdated, bigoted fantasies of a pure-blood heir. Naomi paid for Leo's luxury sports cars, his designer watches, and his expensive golf club memberships. And they were using my company as the secret bank vault to fund the mistress. They had reduced everyone around them to financial assets, to be squeezed, manipulated, and discarded. I looked at Leo. He was staring at his expensive Italian loafers, cowardly avoiding my gaze, letting his parents do the dirty work of defending his infidelity. He had not held a steady job in 5 years. He spent his days lounging in the pristine house Naomi paid for, and his nights sleeping with my supposed best friend. "I see," I said simply. "Good," Thomas grunted, adjusting his silk tie and turning his attention back to the lavish party across the lawn. "I am glad you finally understand reality. We did not want to involve you, but since your husband went snooping around Rachel's office, you leave us no choice but to lay it all out. Now wipe that look off your face and go coordinate the dessert service. We do not want Rachel getting stressed today. She is carrying fragile cargo." Most people would have erupted. Most people would have thrown their champagne, screamed until their lungs burned, and dragged Naomi over to show her the truth right then and there. I felt that primal urge burning in my chest, a wild, consuming fire demanding immediate destruction. But I also knew exactly how my father operated in the corporate world. If I blew this up right now, Thomas would immediately call his ruthless team of lawyers. He would move the stolen money into offshore accounts within hours. He would frame the wire transfer as a corporate misunderstanding or a business loan gone wrong. He would manipulate Naomi, gaslighting her into believing I was simply a jealous, vindictive sister trying to ruin her marriage over a misunderstanding. He would spin the narrative before Naomi could even process the hard proof. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel entirely untouchable. I looked at Leo, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I felt a distinct physical sensation inside my chest, like a heavy iron vault slamming shut and locking away 33 years of familial love. I let a slow, perfectly polite smile curve my lips. I forced every ounce of professional event planner charm I possessed to the surface, creating an impenetrable mask of submission. This was the silent pivot. "You are right," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "This is a family matter. Congratulations on the baby, Leo. I will make sure the dessert service is absolutely unforgettable." Thomas gave a satisfied nod, completely fooled by my compliance. Barbara smiled brightly, already turning her attention back to her wealthy country club friends. Leo let out a massive sigh of relief, reaching for his bourbon glass with shaking hands. I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not look back. My posture was perfect, my steps measured and calm. As I navigated through the crowd of laughing guests, passing trays of caviar and crystal flutes, the invisible strings of obligation that had bound me to this family simply dissolved. I was no longer a daughter. I was no longer a sister. I was a chief executive officer whose assets had been compromised, and a fiercely loyal friend to a brilliant woman who was being monstrously deceived. I found David waiting near the wrought iron entrance gate. His dark eyes frantically scanned my face, bracing for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He reached out to steady me, his hands hovering as if I might collapse on the manicured grass. There was no breakdown. I took his hand, my grip like iron. "Let us go," I told him, not breaking my stride. We walked down the long, sweeping driveway of the estate my money had bought. The warm afternoon air felt completely different now. The world felt sharper, the colors more vivid, my mind operating with a lethal surgical precision. "What did they say?" David asked as soon as we locked ourselves inside the quiet sanctuary of our SUV. He started the engine, his eyes darting to my face. "Did you confront him?" "They admitted it," I said, staring straight ahead at the road. "My father bragged about forging the authorization code. He called my company a family resource. They justified the affair. They think Naomi is just a defective wallet meant to fund Leo's life until the baby is born." David gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. "Gemma, I am so sorry. We can go straight to the police. I have enough preliminary data to freeze the escrow account right now." "No," I replied, the cold logic of revenge already constructing a flawless timeline in my head. "If we go to the police today, my father will hire the best defense team in the city and tie my business up in litigation for years. He will hide the assets. We are going to do this the smart way. We are going to build a trap they cannot litigate their way out of." I opened the passenger door mirror, smoothing a stray strand of hair. My reflection showed a woman who had just attended her own family's funeral, even if they did not know they were dead yet. "Call Naomi," I instructed, pulling out my phone to check her hospital schedule. "Tell her we need to meet her at the hospital cafeteria as soon as her shift ends tonight. Tell her it is an absolute emergency regarding Leo. It is time to go to war." David pulled our SUV out of the pristine neighborhood, leaving the grotesque celebration behind us. The tires hummed against the asphalt, setting a rhythmic cadence to the storm brewing in my mind. As the extravagant mansions faded into the rearview mirror, a profound clarity settled over me. When you are finally pushed past your breaking point, the anger does not burn hot. It freezes. It turns into a glacier of pure, calculated logic. I watched the passing suburban landscape and methodically dissected the entire architecture of my family's dysfunction. For 33 years, I had operated under the delusion that if I just worked hard enough, I could earn my parents' respect. I had built a thriving luxury event planning company from absolute scratch. I generated millions in revenue. I had married a brilliant, decent man. Yet to Thomas and Barbara, I was nothing but a reliable workhorse. My achievements were merely assets they could exploit, completely devoid of the unconditional pride they reserved exclusively for my older brother. Leo was the textbook definition of the golden child. From the moment he was born, he was crowned the infallible heir to the Watson name. My parents constructed a reality where Leo's mere existence was a monumental achievement. When Leo barely scraped through high school with atrocious grades, my parents blamed the teachers. When he dropped out of his first university, my father bought him a luxury sports car to lift his spirits. When he racked up massive gambling debts in his late 20s, my mother quietly drained her own savings to cover his tracks, insisting he was just going through a phase. He was a man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life. My parents had effectively crippled him, transforming him into a 36-year-old parasite disguised in tailored Italian suits. They shielded him from reality, funding his delusions of grandeur while expecting the women in his life to clean up his messes. And no woman had been forced to clean up a bigger mess than Naomi. Thinking about my sister-in-law made the cold fury in my chest solidify. Naomi was exceptional. She was a pioneering African-American neurosurgeon, a woman who shattered glass ceilings through sheer grit and unparalleled intellect. When Leo first brought her home, my parents were visibly intimidated. Naomi possessed a commanding presence that demanded respect, a sharp contrast to the compliant women Leo usually dated. But Thomas and Barbara quickly realized how they could weaponize Naomi's success for their own benefit. Having a top-tier neurosurgeon as a daughter-in-law elevated their social status, allowing them to project an image of progressive, highly successful family integration. More importantly, Naomi's massive income became the new safety net for Leo. My parents happily handed the financial burden of their golden child over to her. Naomi bought their sprawling house. Naomi paid for the luxury cars. She worked grueling 80-hour weeks performing complex brain surgeries while her husband spent his days networking at the golf course. Naomi tolerated Leo's lack of ambition because he played the supportive husband perfectly. He was charming, attentive, and excellent at playing the domestic partner when she came home exhausted from the hospital. She loved him deeply, and she wanted nothing more than to start a family with him. That was when the true cruelty of my parents emerged. When Naomi and Leo encountered severe fertility struggles, the dynamic shifted instantly. My parents' superficial admiration evaporated, replaced by a toxic, deeply bigoted resentment. In their archaic worldview, a woman's primary value was her ability to produce an heir. It did not matter that Naomi saved lives daily. It did not matter that she entirely subsidized their son's life. Because she could not easily conceive, they quietly branded her as defective. They viewed her as a broken asset that was depriving the Watson bloodline of its rightful continuation. Their desperation for a grandson, combined with their inherent lack of morality, created the perfect storm for this ultimate betrayal. Instead of supporting Naomi through her painful fertility treatments, they actively conspired to replace her biological function. They found a willing accomplice in Rachel, my supposed best friend, who had always coveted the lifestyle Naomi and I had earned. Rachel wanted a shortcut to suburban royalty. Leo wanted an heir to appease his parents without losing his wealthy wife. Thomas and Barbara wanted a pure-blood grandson without giving up the neurosurgeon who funded their son's life. They orchestrated a monstrous transaction. They used my company to buy a $1.2 million house to hide the mistress, intending to keep Naomi completely in the dark. They planned to let Naomi continue working those brutal shifts, paying Leo's bills completely unaware that her husband was raising an illegitimate child across town. They viewed both Naomi and me as nothing more than disposable resources. We were the wallets, the workhorses, the silent engines powering their perfect family facade. David reached across the center console and took my hand, breaking me out of my dark reverie. His thumb traced circles over my knuckles, grounding me. "We are 10 minutes away from the hospital," he said softly, keeping his eyes on the darkening road. "Are you ready for this?" I squeezed his hand tightly. "I am ready," I answered. Naomi deserves the truth. She deserves to know exactly who she is sleeping next to and exactly what my family has done to her. We pulled into the sprawling concrete parking structure of the city hospital. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead as we navigated to the visitor parking section. The air smelled of exhaust and antiseptic. I unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbing my purse and slipping my phone into my pocket. I had spent my entire life trying to protect my family from their own destructive nature. I had covered for them, excused them, and financially supported them. That era was officially over. We walked through the sliding glass doors of the hospital lobby. The sterile environment a sharp contrast to the opulent garden party we had just escaped. The clinical atmosphere matched my current state of mind perfectly. There would be no emotion in this upcoming conversation. There would only be raw data, irrefutable evidence, and a strategic alliance forged in the fires of absolute betrayal. We were about to hand a brilliant surgeon the scalpel she needed to cut a malignant tumor out of her life forever. We found a secluded booth in the corner of the hospital cafeteria, far away from the bustling evening shift change. The smell of strong coffee and industrial cleaner hung in the air. Naomi arrived 10 minutes later, still wearing her dark blue scrubs. She looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of her nose before sitting across from us. She offered a tired smile, entirely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to permanently shift. I slid my coffee over to her, keeping my hands perfectly steady. Naomi took a sip and looked between David and me. She asked what was so urgent that it could not wait until tomorrow morning. I did not soften the blow. I simply told her that David found documents at Rachel's house today, and that my parents used my business account to buy the estate. Naomi frowned, setting her coffee down. She asked how that was possible considering I maintained strict oversight of my corporate finances. That was when David opened his laptop. He turned the screen toward her, his posture shifting into full professional mode. David is a forensic accountant who dismantles corporate embezzlement rings for a living. He approached my father's theft with the exact same ruthless precision. He spent the entire afternoon pulling apart the digital architecture of my corporate accounts, tracing every single keystroke my father made. David pulled up a complex spreadsheet highlighted with red markers and digital timestamps. He explained that my father had pleaded with me last month to remain on the LLC framework as a secondary co-signer for tax purposes. I had restricted his access, meaning he could not initiate transfers over $5,000 without dual authentication. My father knew this. He also knew my security questions, my banking routines, and exactly who to manipulate at the bank. David pointed to a specific line on the screen. He told Naomi to look at the IP address log. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when I was managing a high-profile charity gala downtown, my father logged into the banking portal from his home network. He attempted to wire $250,000. The automated system flagged it and required verbal authorization. Naomi leaned closer to the screen, her surgeon's eyes scanning the data rapidly. She asked how Thomas bypassed the verbal confirmation if my phone was securely with me. David pulled up a secondary file containing phone logs and internal bank audit notes he had managed to secure. He explained that my father did not call the main customer service line. He bypassed the standard call center by dialing a specific commercial branch manager who had handled our personal family accounts for decades. My father used his wealthy patriarch status, claiming I was unavailable and in the middle of a massive event crisis. He fed the manager a highly detailed fabricated story about an emergency vendor payment required to secure a massive international contract. The manager, trusting the Watson family prestige and fearing he might cost my company a lucrative deal, manually overrode the security protocol. My father literally smooth-talked his way through a federal banking safeguard, leaving a recorded authorization that David quickly acquired. The sheer audacity of the crime hung heavy over our table. David then clicked to the next tab, revealing a highly sophisticated routing pathway. He traced the $250,000 as it moved from my corporate account, bounced through a temporary holding LLC that Thomas had quietly set up to obscure the origin, and landed squarely in an escrow account managed by a local real estate firm. My father had tried to wash the money. David zoomed in on the final destination document. The escrow account belonged to Rachel Davis. The funds were explicitly labeled as a cash down payment for the property where we had just celebrated her baby shower. Naomi absorbed the information with chilling calmness. She did not gasp or cry out. She simply processed the massive data dump, calculating the variables with a steady gaze. She looked up at David and asked what this had to do with Leo. She pointed out that Thomas stealing from me was terrible, but it did not explain why Leo was involved or why we felt the need to pull her out of her hospital shift. I reached into my purse and pulled out the physical copy of the receipt David had found in Rachel's bathroom. I placed it directly on top of the laptop keyboard. I told Naomi that my father did not buy $1 million house for Rachel out of charity. I told her to read the receipt. Naomi picked up the paper. It was from a premium fertility clinic. She read the lines in absolute silence. I watched her eyes track across the patient name Rachel Davis and slide down to the biological father and funder section. Leo Watson. David gently tapped the screen, bringing up a final timeline graphic that mapped out the last 6 months. He explained that he cross-referenced the dates on the fertility clinic receipt with Leo's personal financial activity. 6 months ago, Leo told Naomi he was attending a week-long real estate investment seminar in Chicago. David showed the credit card logs from that exact week. Leo never went to Chicago. His card was swiped at local gas stations and high-end restaurants right here in the suburbs less than 5 miles from Rachel's apartment. The dates of Leo's fake seminar aligned perfectly with the conception window generated by the clinic's timeline. My parents had funded the entire medical procedure using their own private funds. When Rachel successfully became pregnant with the Watson heir, my father executed the wire fraud to buy her a house tucked away in a gated community, keeping the massive scandal far from Naomi's purview. Naomi placed the receipt back on the table. She sat perfectly still. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. A lesser woman would have shattered right there in the cafeteria, but Naomi was built from stronger material. Her mind was already separating the emotional betrayal from the tactical reality. She was a woman who routinely navigated life and death situations inside operating rooms. She looked at the undeniable evidence of her husband's infidelity and my family's financial conspiracy with the detached focus of someone identifying a fatal disease. David closed the laptop softly. He informed Naomi that because the stolen funds crossed state banking lines during the routing process, Thomas had officially committed federal wire fraud. David had already compiled everything into a secure dossier. The digital footprint was completely airtight. Thomas had left behind metadata-recorded phone calls and clear routing numbers. There was absolutely no way my father could claim this was a simple accounting error. He had intentionally breached a corporate entity to fund a shadow life for his unemployed son. Naomi folded her hands carefully on the table. She looked at me, her dark eyes clear and piercing. She asked if I was prepared to send my own father to a federal penitentiary. I did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. I told her that my father chose his path the moment he decided my business was nothing but a slush fund for his golden child's mistress. I told her I was going to burn his entire financial life to the ground. Naomi let out a slow, steady breath. A lethal smile curved the edges of her mouth. She looked at David, then at me. She said that if I was taking care of Thomas, then she would personally handle Leo. The clinical precision in her voice signaled that the trap was officially set. Naomi leaned back against the hard plastic of the cafeteria booth, the lethal smile still resting perfectly on her face. I watched the brilliant neurosurgeon process the death of her marriage with terrifying efficiency. She did not shed a single tear for Leo. Instead, she asked David to pull up the timeline graphic one more time. Her dark eyes scanned the dates, the locations, and the financial transfers with the exact same clinical detachment she used when analyzing a complex brain scan before a major surgery. She pointed a manicured finger at a cluster of dates from 2 months ago. Naomi explained that during that specific week, my mother had insisted on taking her to a luxury spa resort for 3 days. Barbara had claimed it was a bonding trip to help Naomi relax from her grueling hospital shifts. In reality, it was a highly orchestrated distraction. My mother had intentionally removed Naomi from the city so Leo could comfortably accompany Rachel to her crucial second trimester ultrasound appointments. The realization that my mother had weaponized a gesture of familial affection to facilitate her son's infidelity made the air in the cafeteria feel suffocatingly thin. Naomi took a slow sip of her coffee. She told us that my parents had always operated under a massive, arrogant misconception. Thomas and Barbara believed that because Naomi worked 80 hours a week saving lives, she was completely oblivious to the financial mechanics of her own household. They assumed Leo controlled the purse strings because he had all the free time in the world. They were catastrophically wrong. Naomi revealed the absolute masterpiece of her financial security. Before she ever walked down the aisle with my brother, her family had insisted on an ironclad prenuptial agreement. Leo had signed it eagerly back then, desperate to secure his golden ticket and assuming he would simply charm his way around any restrictions. Naomi explained that the document contained a highly specific ruinous infidelity clause. If adultery could be proven with physical or medical evidence, Leo would forfeit any claim to spousal support, alimony, or property division. He would walk away with exactly what he brought into the marriage, which was absolutely nothing. Furthermore, Naomi detailed how every major asset they shared was legally insulated. The sprawling contemporary house they lived in, the luxury vehicles Leo loved to show off at the country club, and the massive investment portfolios were all locked tightly inside a revocable trust. Naomi was the sole trustee. Leo only had access to a single joint checking account used for daily household expenses and his endless golf club fees. Naomi held the absolute power to financially decapitate him the moment she chose to activate the clause. David slid the physical copy of the fertility clinic receipt across the table toward her. He reminded her that this document, explicitly naming Leo as the biological father and funder of Rachel's child, was the ultimate medical proof required to trigger the prenup. Naomi folded the receipt perfectly in half and placed it securely into her designer handbag. She had the weapon she needed. The conversation then shifted to timing. A meticulous execution required a flawless schedule. I leaned forward across the table and introduced the perfect opportunity. I told them about the upcoming gender reveal party. Just a few days ago, Barbara had summoned me to her house with a list of outrageous demands. My parents wanted me to organize a massive high-profile event at Rachel's new $1.2 million estate. They intended to invite Thomas's senior business partners, powerful real estate investors, and their entire elite social circle. Barbara expected me to provide my luxury event planning services entirely for free, framing it as my necessary contribution to the growing family. They wanted an enormous high-definition digital screen, custom lighting rigs, and top-tier catering. They wanted a stage to celebrate their new heir. I looked at David and Naomi laying out the strategy. The party was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from today. It provided us with a captive audience composed of the exact people my parents desperately wanted to impress. It was the ultimate stage for a public execution of their carefully crafted facade. David adjusted his glasses, his analytical mind rapidly calculating the legal timeline. He confirmed that 3 weeks was the precise window he needed. It would give him enough time to finalize the federal wire fraud dossier, submit the evidence through his secure channels to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and ensure the warrants were fully authorized. By the time the party started, the authorities would be positioned to freeze every single corporate and personal account tied to Thomas Watson. Naomi nodded in agreement, her posture radiating absolute authority. She stated that 21 days was more than enough time for her to execute her end of the strategy. She needed to quietly transfer the remaining balance of the joint checking account, finalize the divorce petition with the most ruthless attorney in the state, and arrange the logistics for Leo's removal. She planned to hire a discreet moving company to arrive at their house on the exact afternoon of the gender reveal party. While Leo was busy celebrating his illegitimate child across town, his entire existence would be packed into black garbage bags and dumped into a prepaid storage unit. We sat in the hospital cafeteria and finalized the rules of engagement. The success of this operation relied on absolute flawless deception. We had to return to our daily lives and play our designated roles perfectly. I had to smile and take orders from Barbara, designing the extravagant party that would serve as their downfall. David had to act like the supportive son-in-law, exchanging pleasantries with the man he was actively sending to federal prison. And Naomi had to go home tonight, look her betrayer in the eyes, and ask him how his day was. We stood up from the booth, united by a singular cold objective. We were no longer victims of the Watson family's toxic entitlement. We were the architects of their impending ruin. Naomi hugged me tightly before turning back toward the surgical ward, her emerald green dress flowing behind her like armor. David and I walked out into the cool night air, ready to build the trap that would end my family's reign of manipulation forever. The next morning, Naomi walked into her sprawling contemporary home just as the sun began to rise over the city. She had finished a grueling 14-hour shift at the hospital, but her mind was operating with terrifying clarity. She found Leo in the kitchen wearing expensive silk pajamas she had bought for him, pouring premium coffee into a custom mug. He smiled his signature charming smile, the one that had convinced her he was a supportive partner all those years ago. He walked over and kissed her cheek, asking how her night at the hospital was. Naomi did not flinch or pull away. She leaned into the embrace just enough to sell the illusion perfectly. She told him it was a routine night, saving lives while he held down the fort. Leo chuckled, pouring himself more coffee, completely blind to the fact that his wife had just examined the blueprint of his total destruction. He casually mentioned he was playing a round of golf with Thomas later that afternoon and might grab dinner at the country club. Naomi simply nodded, told him to have a wonderful time, and went upstairs to shower. The moment the bathroom door locked securely behind her, the performance ended. She turned on the cold water and let it wash away the last remaining traces of her marriage. She marveled at his absolute stupidity. He honestly believed he could outsmart a woman who spent her days operating on the human brain. By noon, Naomi was sitting in the sleek glass-walled office of the most ruthless family law attorney in the state. She bypassed the pleasantries and handed over the thick envelope containing a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the fertility clinic receipt David had secured, and a highly detailed list of her independent corporate assets. The attorney, a formidable woman known for completely dismantling unfaithful spouses, reviewed the clinic document with a sharp, satisfied grin. She confirmed that the biological father designation on a certified medical invoice was absolute, undeniable proof of infidelity. The trapdoor on the prenuptial agreement was fully activated. Naomi instructed her attorney to draft the divorce petition immediately, but explicitly ordered her to hold the official filing until the exact hour of the upcoming gender reveal party. They mapped out the legal timeline with surgical, flawless precision. Leo would not receive a single warning or a preliminary phone call. There would be no mediation, no alimony negotiations, and absolutely no division of property. The house, the luxury cars, and the massive investment portfolios were completely sealed inside her revocable trust. The attorney assured Naomi that Leo would walk away with nothing but the clothes on his back. Next came the ruthless financial execution. Naomi logged into her banking portal right there in the attorney's conference room. She accessed the sole joint checking account she shared with Leo. It was the account she generously funded every single month to cover his ridiculous golf club memberships, his luxury car insurance premiums, and his endless designer wardrobe purchases. The current balance sat at an incredibly comfortable $45,000. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, Naomi transferred $44,900 into a newly created strictly private holding account under her sole name. She left exactly $100 behind. It was just enough money to keep the account active, so no automated closure alerts would be triggered and sent to Leo's phone. She then contacted the payroll department at her hospital and immediately rerouted her massive direct deposits to the new secure account. Leo's financial lifeline was officially and permanently severed. He was walking around the city completely broke, functioning on the fumes of an empty bank account, entirely unaware that the money he planned to use to impress his mistress that weekend no longer existed. The final phase of Naomi's strategy involved the physical eradication of Leo from her property. She contacted a highly discreet premium moving company that specialized in rapid, high-conflict evictions. She paid them double their usual premium rate to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement and guarantee their availability. Their instructions were absolute and unforgiving. On the afternoon of the party, the exact moment Leo drove away from their house, a crew of 6 men would enter the property. They were to pack every single item belonging to Leo into heavy-duty black garbage bags. There would be no careful wrapping of his fragile items, no courtesy boxes for his custom-tailored suits, or imported cologne. Everything he owned was to be unceremoniously dumped into a prepaid climate-controlled storage unit on the industrial outskirts of the city. Naomi also coordinated with a top-tier luxury security firm. They would arrive simultaneously with the moving crew to completely change every physical lock on the estate, reprogram the encrypted garage access codes, and station an armed private guard at the front gate. If Leo tried to return to the house after the public reckoning, he would be met by a locked steel gate and a security guard holding nothing but the key to his storage unit. His life as a wealthy suburban prince was officially marked for demolition. Naomi walked out of the law office, feeling an overwhelming sense of liberation. The parasite was finally being removed gracefully, and she was completely ready to enjoy the brutal impending show that we had so meticulously orchestrated. She had given him absolutely everything. She had provided him with a lifestyle that most people could only dream of, and he had repaid her immense generosity with the ultimate betrayal. But Naomi was not a woman who allowed herself to be a victim. She was a woman of science, of hard facts, and of absolute accountability. She got into her luxury sedan, gripping the leather steering wheel, and smiled. Let him enjoy his final few weeks of blissful ignorance. The countdown to his utter financial and social ruin had officially begun, and there was no stopping it. While Naomi was securing her financial borders across the city, my own battlefield was taking shape inside the opulent dining room of my parents' estate. Less than 24 hours after the baby shower, my phone lit up with a text message from Barbara. She did not ask if my schedule allowed for a visit. She simply stated that I was required for a mandatory planning meeting regarding Rachel's upcoming gender reveal. I dressed in a sharp, tailored blazer, channeling the professional armor I normally reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. When I arrived at their sprawling property, the scene was perfectly engineered to assert their dominance. My father Thomas sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, casually nursing a glass of expensive scotch. My mother paced excitedly near the windows, clutching a thick binder overflowing with magazine clippings and fabric swatches. Rachel was perched on the plush velvet sofa nearby, sipping sparkling water and looking entirely too comfortable holding court in my childhood home. Barbara did not waste a single second on polite pleasantries. She dropped the heavy binder onto the polished wood and declared that this gender reveal needed to be the undisputed social event of the season. She rapidly rattled off a list of demands that would normally cost my corporate clients upward of $80,000. She wanted cascading floral arrangements of imported white orchids, a customized pyrotechnic display, a private catering team flown in from a Michelin star restaurant, and a massive high-definition digital screen to showcase Rachel's brave journey to single motherhood. Thomas chimed in, leaning forward with his elbows planted firmly on the table. He explained with absolute arrogance that he was inviting several key investors from his commercial real estate development firm. He needed his wealthy peers to see the Watson family projecting absolute prosperity, unshakable unity, and legacy. He looked me dead in the eye and stated that my luxury event company would handle every single logistical detail from start to finish. Then came the inevitable sickening punchline. Barbara walked over, placed her manicured hand over mine, and smiled that tight, venomous smile she utilized exclusively for emotional manipulation. She told me that because this was a vital celebration of new family, they expected me to waive all my professional fees. They demanded my labor, my exclusive vendor connections, and my entire staging crew completely free of charge. She shamelessly framed it as my familial duty, a convenient way to make up for my supposed lack of emotional support during Rachel's difficult pregnancy. Rachel chimed in from the sofa, offering a saccharine pout. She thanked me in advance for being such a supportive best friend, rubbing her stomach while wearing a diamond bracelet I knew my brother had bought her using my sister-in-law's money. I looked at the three of them sitting there in their bubble of absolute delusion. My father tapped his luxury watch, signaling his growing impatience for my complete submission. The old version of me would have argued vehemently. The old Gemma would have pointed out the massive loss of business income, the blatant disrespect to my hardworking staff, and the sheer unfiltered audacity of demanding free labor to celebrate a millionaire's hidden mistress. But the new Gemma, the architect of their impending federal destruction, saw only the beautiful fatal flaw in their monumental arrogance. By aggressively forcing me to manage the event, they were handing me the absolute control I needed to execute my plan. They were literally giving me the master keys to their own kingdom. I let my shoulders drop in a carefully calculated display of emotional defeat. I forced a quiet, resigned sigh and nodded slowly. I told them I would do it. I promised, looking directly into my father's eyes, that I would make it the most unforgettable event our elite social circle had ever witnessed. Thomas smirked, taking a deeply satisfied sip of his scotch. He praised my newfound maturity, entirely blind to the executioner sitting across his table. Barbara immediately started dictating the guest list, dropping names of local city officials, wealthy socialites, and every prominent gossip in their country club network. I took meticulous notes on my digital tablet, recording every single name they wanted to impress. I then executed my primary objective. I explicitly insisted that to pull off the complex digital presentation Thomas desired, I needed absolute unrestricted access to the audiovisual network. I told them I required overriding control of the main stage, the wireless microphones, and the massive LED screen. I framed it as a strict necessity for flawless event execution, assuring them it would guarantee no technical glitches would embarrass the family in front of their wealthy investors. Thomas agreed without a second thought. His ego completely blinded him to any potential risk. He quickly signed the vendor authorization forms I slid across the mahogany table, officially making me the sole director of the entire technological setup. I walked out of my parents' house that evening holding the signed contracts tightly against my chest. The cool evening breeze felt electric against my skin. They genuinely thought they had secured a free luxury party to celebrate their stolen legacy. They believed they had successfully bullied me into submission, using my own company resources to build a monument to their deception. They had absolutely no idea that by demanding that LED screen and forcing me to control the narrative, they had just funded their own spectacular public execution. The stage was now fully constructed, the audience was officially invited, and the trap was perfectly set. When I returned home and placed the signed vendor agreements on our kitchen island, David looked at the documents with a sharp, satisfied grin. He immediately began integrating the audiovisual timeline into his federal reporting schedule. We spent the rest of the night mapping out the exact minute the authorities would receive the final wire fraud dossier, ensuring the financial freeze would hit Thomas right as he stood under the party lights. Everything was falling perfectly into place. The following 2 weeks tested my self-control more than any corporate crisis I had ever managed in my entire career. Playing the role of the subservient, defeated daughter required Oscar-worthy acting, especially when dealing directly with Rachel. We held our first on-site design meeting at the $1.2 million estate my father had stolen from my company to purchase. Rachel greeted me at the mahogany double doors, wearing a silk maternity robe that I recognized from Naomi's favorite designer boutique. The sheer audacity of her stealing my sister-in-law's husband, accepting a stolen house, and then copying Naomi's personal style made my stomach turn. I forced a warm, enthusiastic smile and stepped inside. Rachel immediately launched into a list of demands that bordered on the absurd. We sat at her massive marble kitchen island while she scrolled through an endless Pinterest board of over-the-top party inspirations. She informed me that she did not just want standard floral arrangements. She demanded a custom-built floral tunnel featuring thousands of rare blue and pink hydrangeas imported directly from Holland. She wanted a bespoke mocktail bar with a celebrity mixologist, a petting zoo with exotic animals for the children of the investors, and personalized gold-plated gift bags for every single guest. When I gently reminded her that my parents had given me a strict logistical time frame, and that these items normally required months of advance booking and massive deposits, Rachel simply rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. She placed a hand on her swollen stomach and offered me a look of pure condescending pity. She told me that I needed to make it happen because she was carrying the future of the Watson family. She actually had the nerve to suggest that if my event company could not handle a simple VIP request, maybe I was not as successful as I pretended to be. I swallowed the sharp, venomous reply burning in my throat. I nodded dutifully, typing her ridiculous demands into my tablet, and assured her I would use my personal industry connections to expedite everything at no cost to her. Right as Rachel was demanding velvet-draped seating for the VIP lounge area, my father walked through the front door. Thomas entered the house with the swagger of a conquering king inspecting his newly acquired territory. He tossed his keys onto the console table and walked into the kitchen, kissing Rachel on the cheek before turning his arrogant gaze toward me. He asked how the party preparations were going, his tone implying that I was merely a hired servant, lucky to be allowed in his presence. I kept my voice light and professional, assuring him that everything was proceeding exactly as he had commanded. I showed him the digital mock-ups for the massive LED screen he had requested for the backyard. I told him I had secured the absolute best audiovisual team in the city to ensure his presentation to the investors would be flawless. Thomas puffed out his chest, immensely pleased with himself. He leaned against the marble island and decided to offer me a lesson in high-level finance. It was a staggering display of narcissism. He actually bragged about the wire transfer. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water and told Rachel how easy it had been to bypass my company's financial safeguards. He boasted about calling the commercial branch manager and spinning a brilliant high-pressure story about a sudden corporate acquisition. Thomas laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the high ceilings. He called the bank manager a gullible fool who cared more about keeping the Watson family accounts active than following standard security protocols. He looked directly at me and said that true power in the business world was not about following rules, but about knowing exactly which people to manipulate to get around them. He framed his federal wire fraud as a stroke of executive genius. He completely believed he was invincible. I stood in that pristine kitchen, clutching my digital tablet, and played right into his monumental ego. I widened my eyes in feigned admiration and told him his strategy was incredibly bold. I stroked his vanity, asking him detailed questions about how he managed to clear the escrow holding account without triggering the federal reporting threshold alerts. Thomas, eager to show off his financial dominance to both his daughter and his son's mistress, happily detailed his exact money laundering process. He explained how he had temporarily routed the $250,000 through a shell company he used for property management, making the transaction look like a standard commercial real estate investment before funneling it directly into Rachel's closing costs. He gave me the exact name of the shell company and the specific routing pathway he utilized. He was handing me the final nails for his own coffin. Every word he spoke provided David with the missing links needed to make the FBI dossier completely unassailable. I thanked my father for the invaluable business advice, maintaining my flawless mask of submission. I packed up my tablet, politely excused myself to finalize the vendor contracts, and walked out to my SUV. The facade of obedience was exhausting, but it was paying off in dividends. Thomas's financial arrogance had completely blinded him to the reality of his situation. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in power, but he was actually dictating his own confession. I drove away from the estate knowing that his absolute confidence would make the impending public execution all the more devastating. By carefully recording his exact strategy, I had ensured that no high-priced defense attorney could ever save him. He was going to lose everything he held dear, and he had just given me the roadmap to destroy him completely and utterly without mercy. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, a cold sense of absolute victory washing over me as I accelerated down the tree-lined suburban street. I marched straight into David's home office. He sat at his multi-monitor workstation surrounded by digital forensic tools. I dropped my leather tote bag onto his desk and repeated every single word my father had just arrogantly bragged about in Rachel's kitchen. I gave David the exact name of the shell company Thomas used to wash the stolen funds alongside the specific routing pathway he had so foolishly detailed. David's eyes lit up with the predatory thrill of a hunter who had just been handed the exact coordinates of his prey. He began cross-referencing the new information with the banking logs. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the state corporate registry database. Within minutes, David penetrated the veil of the shell company my father thought was entirely untraceable. It was registered under a defunct property management subsidiary that Thomas had effectively abandoned a decade ago, but the primary registration still listed his personal social security number and home address. David linked the initial wire transfer from my event planning company to this subsidiary account, mapping the exact hour the funds sat there before being funneled directly into the real estate escrow account for Rachel's mansion. David explained the magnitude of this discovery as he compiled the data into the master file. By utilizing a secondary corporate entity to obscure the origin of the stolen money, Thomas had escalated his crime from simple unauthorized access to federal money laundering. David meticulously organized the IP address logs, the forged verbal authorization recordings, and the new routing evidence into a comprehensive encrypted digital dossier. He formatted the entire package according to the strict submission guidelines of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. He had a contact within the Bureau, a senior agent he regularly collaborated with on high-level corporate embezzlement cases. David drafted a highly secure email attaching the ironclad dossier and scheduled it to send automatically on the exact afternoon of the gender reveal party. The moment the timer hit 0, the federal authorities would receive everything they needed to freeze my father's assets, seize his accounts, and issue a grand jury indictment. While David was locking in the federal trap, Naomi was executing her own brand of clinical destruction across town. She had taken a rare afternoon off from the neurosurgery ward to finalize the financial decapitation of her husband. She sat in the sleek glass-walled boardroom of her wealth management firm, sipping sparkling water while reviewing her massive investment portfolios. Her primary financial advisor, a discreet and highly efficient man, slid a stack of transfer authorizations across the polished table. Naomi signed each document with a steady, unyielding hand. She completely liquidated the remaining balance of the only joint checking account she shared with Leo, leaving behind a microscopic sum of exactly $100. She severed his access to the premium credit cards, canceled the secondary user status on her corporate accounts, and officially revoked his driving privileges for the luxury vehicles leased under her medical practice. Naomi then left the wealth management firm and drove directly to her divorce attorney's office. The attorney had the final petition prepared and waiting. Because Naomi possessed the physical medical receipt proving Leo was the biological father of Rachel's unborn child, the infidelity clause in their prenuptial agreement was triggered with absolute, undeniable legal force. The document guaranteed that Leo would walk away from the marriage completely destitute. Naomi read through the final stipulations, ensuring there was absolutely no room for mediation or alimony negotiations, and signed her name with a flourish. Her final task of the day involved coordinating the physical eradication of Leo from her pristine contemporary home. Naomi met with the director of the private security firm and the manager of the elite moving company she had hired. She laid out the timeline with the exact same precision she used when mapping out a complex brain tumor extraction. The moving crew was instructed to arrive at her property at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on the day of the gender reveal party, the exact moment Leo would be driving away to celebrate his illegitimate child. They were ordered to pack every single item belonging to Leo into heavy-duty black garbage bags and transport them to a prepaid climate-controlled storage unit on the industrial edge of the city. Simultaneously, the security team would sweep the property, change every lock, reprogram the digital garage codes, and station an armed guard at the front gate. Naomi handed the security director a sealed envelope containing the key to Leo's storage unit and a copy of the divorce petition. She instructed the guard to hand the envelope to Leo when he inevitably tried to return to the house that evening. Later that evening, the three of us convened on a secure video call. Naomi appeared on the screen looking relaxed and radiant in her home office, enjoying a glass of expensive red wine paid for by her own hard-earned money. David sat beside me, closing the final tab on his forensic accounting software. We went over the master schedule one last time, synchronizing our timelines down to the minute. The trap was now fully constructed, the escape routes were completely blocked, and the ammunition was locked and loaded. My parents and my brother were sleeping soundly in their respective beds, completely oblivious to the fact that their entire world was built on a crumbling foundation of lies. They believed they were untouchable. They believed their social status and their arrogant entitlement made them immune to consequence. They had no idea that a neurosurgeon, a forensic accountant, and an event planner had just engineered the perfect storm. The days ticked down with agonizing slowness. Every demand my mother made, every smug comment my father delivered, and every arrogant text Leo sent only fueled the cold fire burning in my chest. We were ready for the public reckoning. The morning of the gender reveal party arrived with pristine, cloudless skies. I pulled my SUV into the circular driveway of Rachel's $1.2 million estate at exactly 6. My production crew was already unloading massive rolls of white velvet draping and crates of imported floral arrangements. I stepped out wearing a sleek, tailored black jumpsuit, holding my digital tablet like a shield. Today, I was the ultimate professional. I directed the lighting technicians to construct towering aluminum trusses around the perimeter of the backyard, ensuring the focal point remained squarely on the custom-built main stage. The stage was situated directly beside the infinity pool, perfectly positioned for the impending spectacle. I watched my team meticulously assemble the floral tunnel, weaving thousands of rare blue and pink hydrangeas into a breathtaking canopy. I supervised the placement of the velvet-draped seating in the VIP lounge area, making sure the investors had the best seats in the house. It looked like a fairy tale. It was the exact type of extravagant display my parents craved to project their manufactured wealth. I smiled as I checked off the delivery on my tablet. Let them have their beautiful stage. A public execution always requires a sturdy scaffold. By 9 o'clock, the audiovisual company arrived with the centerpiece of the entire event. It was an enormous high-definition LED screen mounted directly behind the main stage and secured with heavy-weighted sandbags hidden beneath white velvet skirting. The lead technician handed me the master control terminal, but I cut him off. I informed him my company utilized proprietary broadcasting software, instructing him to physically hardwire the receiver to the screen, entirely bypassing the wireless network. I wanted zero chance of outside interference. I needed a closed circuit that could not be hacked by anyone. Once the cables were locked in, I paid the audiovisual crew their full day rate, plus a massive cash tip, and dismissed them completely. They happily packed up their remaining gear and left the estate. I was now the only person on the property with the technical capability to control that massive digital display. I stood alone on the stage, connected my iPad to the closed network, and initiated a private test run. I tapped the screen. Instantly, the massive LED display lit up with the Federal Wire transfer confirmation, the bright red highlights glowing vividly in the morning sun. I swiped my finger. The fertility clinic receipt explicitly naming Leo as the biological father loomed over the infinity pool. I swiped one last time, projecting the cruel text messages between Barbara and Rachel in crisp, undeniable high definition. The resolution was flawless. I quickly cleared the screen, reverting it to the holding graphic of floating pink and blue clouds that Rachel had requested. I locked the iPad using my biometric fingerprint scanner. The digital guillotine was officially loaded. Just before noon, my parents arrived to inspect the grounds. Thomas stepped out of his luxury sedan, wearing a tailored navy suit, looking incredibly smug as he surveyed the property he had fraudulently purchased. Barbara fluttered out behind him, clutching her designer handbag, her eyes darting around the manicured lawn, looking for imperfections. She marched straight up to the stage, loudly demanding that I adjust the warm ambient filters so the harsh overhead lighting would not ruin her complexion in the professional photos. I simply nodded, tapped a fake command into my tablet, and told her I had recalibrated the entire spectrum to her exact specifications. Rachel emerged from the house shortly after, wearing a flowing pastel maternity dress, placing a performative hand over her stomach. She squealed with manufactured delight when she saw the floral tunnel. She walked over to Thomas, linking her arm through his, thanking him loudly for providing such a stunning venue for her baby. Thomas patted her hand, boasting that the Watson family always provided the absolute best for their own. I stood there watching this grotesque display of mutual delusion, maintaining my flawless customer service smile. Leo arrived an hour later, stepping out of a sports car paid for by his neurosurgeon wife. He jogged up the driveway, laughing and high-fiving the catering manager as if he owned the place. He pulled Rachel into a tight hug, completely unbothered by his ultimate betrayal. As the caterers began setting up the bespoke mocktail bar, David pulled into the driveway. He walked over to my production desk, stationed discreetly behind a row of tall hedges. He was dressed impeccably, playing the role of the supportive husband to perfection, while carrying the digital execution codes in his pocket. He leaned in close, pretending to inspect my event schedule. He whispered that the federal email timer was officially locked and counting down on his secure server. The FBI White-Collar Crime Division would receive the complete encrypted wire fraud dossier at precisely 4 o'clock, perfectly coinciding with the planned gender reveal countdown. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a secure text message from Naomi. It was a simple, chilling update. The moving trucks are parked 2 blocks away, and the security team is in position waiting for my signal. The synchronization was absolutely beautiful. We had completely encircled them. I looked out over this backyard as the first wave of elite guests began to arrive. Luxury vehicles lined the street, dropping off wealthy investors and country club presidents. Valets rushed back and forth, opening doors for the very people Thomas and Barbara were so desperate to impress. The ambient music swelled, mixing with the polite chatter and the clinking of crystal glasses. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. I took a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of my black blazer. I picked up my locked iPad, the heavy weight of it settling comfortably in my palms. I stepped out from behind the hedges and walked toward the main stage. The time for preparation was over. The trap was ready to snap shut. The catering team floated through the growing crowd, bearing silver trays of beluga caviar and truffle-infused tartlets. The waitstaff moved with practiced elegance, ensuring that no crystal glass was ever empty. The sprawling backyard of the stolen estate rapidly filled with the most influential figures in the metropolitan area. My father had spared absolutely no expense when curating his guest list, utilizing his daughter's free labor to host a massive networking event, thinly disguised as a baby shower. I stood near the audiovisual control board, watching as the city's top commercial real estate developers, local politicians, and venture capitalists stepped onto the manicured lawn. These were men and women whose entire careers were built on strict risk assessment and financial integrity. They wore bespoke suits and carried themselves with the effortless authority of generational wealth. Thomas was completely in his element. I watched my father greet a prominent banking executive near the custom mocktail bar. Thomas clapped the man on the shoulder, gesturing broadly toward the massive property. He spoke loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear, bragging about the booming real estate market and his flawless instinct for lucrative investments. He actually pointed to the infinity pool and boasted about the excellent closing terms he had personally negotiated for this estate, completely omitting the minor detail that he had committed federal wire fraud to fund the transaction. He looked like a king surveying a conquered territory, completely unaware that his throne was built on quicksand. Barbara was equally insufferable. She glided between the velvet-draped seating areas, a crystal flute of sparkling water in her hand to show solidarity with the pregnant guest of honor. My mother introduced Rachel to the wives of the country club board members, expertly spinning a fabricated narrative of profound maternal charity. I adjusted an earpiece and listened as Barbara told the captivated wives that Rachel was practically an adopted daughter to them, a brave single mother, embarking on a beautiful journey alone. The older women cooed and offered sympathetic smiles, entirely oblivious to the fact that the biological father of the child was standing less than 10 feet away. Barbara patted Rachel's arm affectionately, cementing the illusion of their incredible benevolence. Rachel played her part with an absolutely sickening level of theatrical perfection. She stood near the center of the floral tunnel, wearing a soft pastel gown that perfectly accentuated her pregnancy, looking demure and suitably grateful. She delicately dabbed at her eyes with a white tissue when one of the investors congratulated her on finding such a supportive surrogate family. Rachel thanked the man profusely, claiming she simply did not know where she would be without the incredible generosity of the Watson family. The hypocrisy was so dense it was practically choking me. She was standing in a house bought with stolen funds, surrounded by hydrangeas I had sourced preparing to birth a child, conceived through blatant infidelity. Leo leaned casually against a high-top table nearby, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He nodded along as an older investor discussed commercial zoning permits, pretending he actually understood high-level corporate strategy. Every so often, Leo would shoot a subtle longing glance at Rachel when he thought no one was watching. He would occasionally stroll over to her side, bringing her a fresh plate of appetizers, playing the role of the protective, platonic older brother figure. The sheer arrogance of their proximity was astounding. They felt so incredibly safe in their deception that they were essentially parading their affair in front of the entire city. They honestly believed their wealth and social standing rendered them completely invisible to consequence. I moved through the crowd, invisibly checking catering stations and adjusting microphone levels, ensuring my facade of total subservience remained unbroken. Whenever Thomas snapped his fingers to demand a fresh drink or a different appetizer tray for his elite guests, I complied with an eager nod. I walked over to the petting zoo we had set up near the edge of the property, making sure the handlers were managing the miniature ponies perfectly for the children of the investors. I wanted every single detail to be immaculate. I wanted my father to feel like the absolute master of his universe. I wanted his ego inflated to its absolute maximum capacity before I punctured it with a federal needle. As I circled back toward the main stage, I caught David's eye. He stood near the edge of the patio, holding a glass of club soda, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp and calculating. He casually checked his designer watch and gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. We had exactly 30 minutes until the digital dossier hit the federal servers. 30 minutes until Naomi's security team locked Leo out of his own life forever. The anticipation buzzed under my skin, like a live wire, making the air feel electric and charged with impending ruin. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of the imported hydrangeas, and let the sheer perfection of our hidden strategy wash over my exhausted mind. The painstaking weeks of swallowing my pride, enduring their endless insults, and pretending to be nothing more than a subservient party planner were finally culminating in this exact moment. My father grabbed a microphone from the sound stand and tapped it twice, the sharp thud echoing loudly across the immaculate lawn. He smiled broadly and asked the guests to begin finding their seats in the VIP lounge areas. He proudly announced that the time to celebrate the newest addition to their extended family was rapidly approaching. The guests happily obliged, taking their seats on the plush velvet chairs, laughing and holding their drinks. The trap was fully populated. Every single target was locked in place, smiling blindly into the sun, completely unaware of the digital avalanche waiting to bury their entire legacy under a mountain of undeniable federal evidence. We were ready to begin. The guests settled into their plush velvet chairs, their attention shifting toward the floral tunnel, where Rachel now stood holding a wireless microphone. She adjusted her pastel maternity dress, deliberately accentuating the curve of her stomach, and looked out at the sea of wealthy investors and country club socialites. She took a shaky, performative breath, instantly commanding the sympathy of the entire audience. "I want to thank every single one of you for being here today." Rachel began, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured emotion. "As many of you know, my journey to motherhood has not been an easy one. Deciding to have a baby on my own, relying on an anonymous donor, was the most terrifying decision of my life. I thought I would have to face the sleepless nights and the overwhelming fear completely alone." She paused, wiping a solitary, expertly placed tear from her cheek. The older women in the front row murmured in sympathy. Thomas and Barbara stood to the side, nodding with grave parental benevolence. But I was not alone. Rachel continued, her voice gaining a triumphant, tearful strength. Thomas and Barbara stepped in when I had absolutely nothing. They welcomed me into their home, into their hearts, and treated me like the daughter I always wished I could be. They gave me this beautiful estate to raise my child in safely. They proved that true family is about stepping up when someone is in desperate need. The sheer level of manipulation was staggering. Rachel was standing on a stage publicly soliciting pity from billionaires while secretly carrying my brother's child and living in a house purchased with $250,000 stolen from my business. She was painting herself as a brave, independent martyr, completely ignoring the fact that she was actively destroying a marriage and enabling a federal crime. And Leo, Rachel added, turning slightly to look at my brother who was beaming with unearned pride. Leo has been my rock. He accompanied me to the clinic when I was too scared to go alone. He assembled the nursery furniture. He has been the fiercely protective older brother figure I never had. Thank you, Leo, for showing my child what a good man looks like. I gripped the edges of my digital tablet so tightly my knuckles turned white. Leo was nodding humbly, soaking up the applause from the investors who thought he was performing an act of incredible charity. The absolute delusion required for him to stand there and accept praise for assembling cribs for his own illegitimate child, while his wife performed brain surgery across town, was breathtaking. Just as the applause began to die down, the heavy wrought iron gates at the edge of the driveway swung open. The rhythmic click of designer heels against the cobblestone commanded instant attention. Naomi had arrived. She stepped onto the patio looking like absolute royalty. She wore a tailored white silk pantsuit that contrasted beautifully with her flawless dark skin, her posture radiating power and effortless grace. The moment she entered, the atmosphere in the backyard shifted. Several high-profile guests immediately stood up to greet her. Naomi was, after all, the chief of neurosurgery at the city's top hospital. Her reputation preceded her, and in rooms filled with elite power brokers, she was the most genuinely accomplished person present. Leo's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw his wife. He had clearly expected her to remain at the hospital safely out of the way, while he paraded his pregnant mistress in front of his parents' friends. But Leo quickly recovered his composure. He jogged over to Naomi, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist and kissing her cheek. "Babe, you made it!" Leo said loudly, ensuring the nearby investors heard his display of domestic affection. "I thought you had a major spinal surgery scheduled for this afternoon." "I rearranged my schedule," Naomi replied smoothly. Her voice was warm and entirely unbothered. She allowed him to hold her, not leaning into the embrace, but not pulling away either. She was playing her part with terrifying perfection. "I would not miss this celebration for the world. After all, new family is so incredibly important." Barbara hurried over her face, tightening into a mask of polite, nervous tension. She practically shoved a crystal flute of sparkling water into Naomi's hand. "Naomi, dear, we really did not expect you. Since you know events involving babies can be somewhat sensitive for you given your situation." The sheer cruelty of the comment, delivered with a sweet, sympathetic smile in front of the guests, was designed to put Naomi in her place. Barbara was subtly reminding the neurosurgeon of her supposed biological failure. But Naomi did not flinch. She did not look away. She simply smiled down at my mother with an expression of pure, predatory calm. "Oh, Barbara, you do not need to worry about my sensitivities today," Naomi said, her tone ringing with absolute authority. "Today is all about clarity. I am just here to celebrate the undeniable truth." Naomi smoothly bypassed my mother and walked directly toward the main stage, where Rachel was still holding the microphone. The crowd parted for the brilliant surgeon. Naomi stepped up to the edge of the floral tunnel, looked at Rachel's swollen stomach, and offered a brilliant, chilling smile. "Rachel, you look absolutely radiant," Naomi declared, her voice carrying across the silent lawn. "It is truly remarkable what modern medicine can achieve these days. The wonders of the fertility clinic are just boundless. I brought you a gift. I hope it keeps the baby very, very warm when the weather changes." Naomi handed Rachel a small, incredibly expensive silver gift box. Rachel took it with trembling hands, her eyes darting nervously toward Leo. She murmured a quick thank you, clearly unsettled by Naomi's commanding presence and the sharp underlying edge to her words. Rachel did not know that Naomi possessed the medical receipt. She did not know that the woman standing before her held the power to render her unborn child's father completely destitute in less than an hour. I watched from the control board, absolutely awestruck by my sister-in-law. Naomi was a master tactician. She was looking her betrayer right in the eyes and handing her a silver box, knowing full well that an eviction notice and a federal indictment were coming next. Thomas walked up to the stage, clapping his hands together to break the mounting tension. He checked his luxury watch, his impatience returning. He looked over at me standing in the shadows behind the audiovisual equipment and gave a sharp, demanding nod. "All right, everyone," Thomas boomed into the microphone he snatched from Rachel. "We have thanked the hosts and we have welcomed the guests. It is time to get to the main event. It is time to find out the future of our family legacy. Gemma, fire up the presentation. Let us see what my grandson is going to be." I looked down at my locked iPad. The digital clock in the upper right corner read 3:45. We had exactly 15 minutes until the FBI received the unredacted wire fraud dossier. We had 15 minutes until the moving trucks pulled up to Naomi's house to throw Leo's life into garbage bags. I unlocked the screen, using my biometric scanner, bypassing the fake pastel cloud graphics I had displayed for the crowd. I accessed the hidden folder David and I had meticulously constructed the night before. I placed my finger over the master broadcast button, feeling the cold, hard weight of impending justice. "Yes, Dad," I said into my headset, knowing my voice would project through the surround sound speakers perfectly. "Let us show everyone exactly what kind of legacy you have built." I stepped out from the shadowy perimeter of the audiovisual station, a sleek wireless microphone gripped firmly in my right hand. The heels of my shoes clicked rhythmically against the stone pavers as I walked past the velvet seating and directly onto the main stage. The ambient music faded into a low, anticipatory hum. 100 pairs of eyes shifted from my father to me. The investors, the socialites, the country club board members, all of them waited with breathless excitement. I had spent my entire life hopelessly conforming to their impossible standards, constantly hiding my own pain, just to maintain their pristine public image. Not anymore. I offered the crowd a brilliant, blinding smile. The kind of smile I usually reserved for high-stakes corporate galas when everything was perfectly under control. Today, I was not just the hired help. I was the master of ceremonies for my family's impending destruction. "Welcome, distinguished guests," I announced, my voice echoing crisply across the sprawling manicured lawn. "We are gathered here on this beautiful afternoon to celebrate something truly remarkable, an event that perfectly encapsulates the core values of the Watson family." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the front row. I locked eyes with a senior vice president from my father's primary lending bank. He was a man known for his ruthless adherence to federal banking regulations. He raised his champagne glass to me. I nodded back, knowing that in less than 10 minutes, his risk assessment department would be freezing every single account associated with the man standing to my left. My father crossed his arms, puffing out his chest with sheer, unadulterated arrogance. He believed my introduction was a glowing endorsement of his patriarchal dominance. My mother Barbara stood right beside him, adjusting her pearl necklace and smiling magnanimously at her wealthy friends. They were so drunk on their own perceived brilliance that they failed to notice the trap closing tightly around them. I turned my attention directly to them. I raised my free hand, gesturing toward the architects of my misery. "Before we reveal the grand surprise," I continued, my tone laced with heavy, undetected irony, "we must acknowledge the incredible generosity that made this entire estate possible. Thomas and Barbara Watson have always believed in securing the future. They believe that bloodlines and legacies require substantial financial investments. When Rachel came to them with her miraculous news, they did not hesitate. They bypassed all standard protocols. They moved mountains and capital to ensure this $1.2 million property was secured with absolute discretion. Let us give a round of applause for their unparalleled financial maneuvers. The crowd clapped enthusiastically, Thomas Beam tipping his glass toward the investors. He actually thought I was praising his business acumen. He had absolutely no idea I was publicly detailing his exact motive and method for federal wire fraud right in front of the people he needed to impress the most. The sheer unwavering blindness of his monumental ego was absolutely staggering. Next, I turned my attention to the other side of the stage. Rachel stood under the massive floral archway, clutching her stomach with a practiced look of innocent joy. Leo stood a few feet away, shifting his weight nervously from one expensive Italian loafer to the other. His eyes kept darting toward Naomi, who remained standing perfectly still at the edge of the patio, watching the spectacle with the detached fascination of a scientist, observing a deeply flawed lab experiment. And of course, I said, lowering my voice to a softer, more intimate register, we must recognize the profound dedication of my brother Leo. While Rachel navigated the frightening world of fertility clinics and anonymous donors, Leo stepped up. He attended those crucial appointments. He provided the necessary funding and the biological support that Rachel so desperately needed. He acted as the ultimate provider, a role he has fully embraced behind closed doors. Rachel blushed, looking down at her designer maternity dress. Leo offered a tight, forced smile. He thought I was covering for him, spinning his adultery into a narrative of platonic, brotherly assistance. He actually believed I was helping him maintain his facade in front of his neurosurgeon wife. He had no clue the moving trucks were backing into his driveway, preparing to strip his life down to the bare studs. I glanced down at the digital monitor strapped to my wrist. The glowing numbers read 3:58. We were 2 minutes away from federal execution. I looked across the lawn and caught David's eye. My brilliant forensic accountant husband stood entirely motionless. He pulled his phone from his pocket, checked the secure server countdown, and gave me a single definitive nod. The encrypted dossier was queuing up. Agents were taking their positions. The legal guillotine was raised high. It is almost time, I announced, raising the microphone higher. The crowd leaned forward, whispering excitedly, but a standard gender reveal simply would not do justice to the sheer magnitude of what the Watson family has accomplished here today. Pink and blue smoke is too temporary. We needed a reveal that leaves a permanent, undeniable paper trail. We needed to show you the exact receipts. My father frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together. The word receipts triggered a primal, instinctual warning in his corporate brain. He took a hesitant step toward the edge of the stage, suddenly looking unsure. Gemma, he muttered, his voice losing its confident boom. Just play the video. Stick to the script. I smiled directly at him, my eyes completely devoid of warmth. I am sticking to the script, Dad. Just not yours. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my biometric iPad. The screen illuminated my face with a cold, harsh light. I placed my thumb against the scanner. The system unlocked with a soft click. The massive LED screen behind me hummed with raw electricity, ready to broadcast the absolute truth to the entire city. The massive LED screen behind me hummed with raw electricity, ready to broadcast the absolute truth to the entire city. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I dragged my index finger across the smooth glass of my tablet. The gentle acoustic lullaby music that had been playing softly through the surround sound speakers abruptly cut off. It was replaced by a sharp, piercing electronic tone, a sound designed specifically to command absolute, unwavering attention from every single person in the garden. The pastel pink and blue clouds completely vanished from the colossal display. The screen flashed a blinding, pristine white. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the first high-definition image materialized. It was not a sonogram. It was a heavily redacted, perfectly highlighted banking document. It loomed 10 feet tall, making the numbers impossible to ignore even from the back row. I raised the microphone to my lips, my voice echoing with surgical precision. Let us begin with the foundation of this beautiful new home, I announced. As you can clearly see, this is a wire transfer confirmation dated exactly 3 weeks ago. The amount is $250,000. The origin account belongs to my luxury event planning firm, Gemma Events and Design, and the authorizing signature bypassing standard corporate dual authentication belongs to my father, Thomas Watson. A low murmur swept through the rows of velvet chairs. I looked directly at the senior vice president from my father's bank who was sitting in the front row. The man had completely stopped smiling. His champagne flute was frozen halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted rapidly across the giant screen, absorbing the routing numbers and the undeniable proof of unauthorized corporate access. I tapped the tablet again. A red digital marker appeared on the LED screen, circling the destination of the stolen funds. The money did not go to a legitimate business vendor, I explained calmly. It was routed through a defunct shell company registered to Thomas Watson, and it landed directly into a local real estate escrow account. The exact escrow account used to purchase the $1.2 million estate we are currently standing in. Thomas lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "Gemma, turn that off right now!" he roared, his voice cracking under the sheer weight of his exposure. "This is a technical error. Shut it down." "It is not an error, Dad," I replied, my voice slicing through his panic like a scalpel. "It is federal wire fraud." The banking executive in the front row immediately stood up, pulled a cell phone from his tailored suit pocket, and began dialing rapidly. Several other prominent real estate investors followed suit, their faces hardening as they realized they were attending a party funded by grand larceny. They were actively calculating their legal exposure just by being present on the property. But we are not here merely to celebrate financial crimes. I continued, pacing slowly across the stage. We are here to celebrate biology. We are here to celebrate the true Watson family legacy. I swiped my finger across the glass. The banking document dissolved, instantly replaced by a pristine, high-resolution scan of a medical invoice. It was from the city's most exclusive fertility and prenatal clinic. The logo was unmistakable. The crowd leaned in their eyes, scanning the sterile medical text until they reached the bottom of the page where the red digital marker had already circled the most crucial information. "Patient name Rachel Davis," I read aloud, ensuring my voice reached every corner of the manicured lawn. "Biological father and primary funding source Leo Watson." The silence that descended upon the garden was absolute. It was a vacuum of sound, sucking the oxygen straight out of the air. Rachel let out a sharp, breathless squeak, her hands dropping instantly from her perfectly styled maternity dress. She looked frantically around the crowd, her victim facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Leo froze completely. The arrogant, wealthy posture he had maintained all afternoon collapsed. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. He instinctively turned his head toward the edge of the patio, desperately seeking out his wife. Naomi stood there in her immaculate white silk pantsuit, holding her glass of sparkling water. She did not look shocked. She did not shed a single tear. She simply raised her glass a fraction of an inch toward Leo, acknowledging his total destruction with the cold, detached grace of a queen, watching a traitor walk to the gallows. Barbara stumbled forward, her face drained of all color. "Gemma, stop this instantly," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are ruining everything. You are destroying your own family. I am simply revealing the family you actually built." "Mom," I responded softly into the microphone. "But a picture is only worth 1,000 words. Let us give the guests something to read. Let us show them the true heart of the Watson matriarch." I swiped the screen one final time. The massive LED display shifted from the medical invoice to a stark, high-contrast screenshot of an iMessage conversation. It had been recovered directly from the cloud backup on the shared family iPad. The text bubbles loomed massive and undeniable over the infinity pool. I did not just let the guests read the exchange. I read it aloud, forcing every single elite member of my parents' social circle to hear the profound, sickening cruelty of their hosts. The sheer maliciousness of the words displayed in glowing blue and gray bubbles completely stripped away any remaining deniability. Rachel clamped her hands over her face, shrinking back against the floral tunnel she had so arrogantly demanded, wishing the earth would swallow her whole. "A message from Barbara Watson," I announced. "Make sure Naomi does not see the clinic bills. Thomas transferred the money from Gemma's account today." A reply from Rachel Davis. Thank you. I cannot wait to give Leo the son Naomi is too broken to provide. And the final response from Barbara Watson. She is just a wallet, dear. You are the real family now. The reaction was visceral and immediate. A collective gasp of pure horror erupted from the country club socialites who had just spent the last hour listening to Barbara praise Rachel's bravery. The wealthy wives who had cooed over Rachel's pregnancy now recoiled in absolute disgust. Several women physically stepped back from Barbara, creating a wide circle of isolation around her on the lawn. They looked at my mother as if she were carrying a highly contagious lethal disease. To use a brilliant, accomplished woman to fund your son's lazy existence while secretly buying his mistress a house with stolen money is not family legacy, I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute finality. It is parasitism. It is moral bankruptcy. And as of this exact moment, it is entirely public knowledge. The carefully curated illusion of the perfect Watson family lay in absolute smoldering ruins across the manicured grass. Absolute pandemonium broke out. Polite murmurs transformed into a stampede. Investors and executives scrambled toward the gates, desperate to escape a federal crime. They knocked over glasses, only caring about distancing themselves from Thomas. Thomas roared. His face was a terrifying shade of purple as he lunged forward, charging up the stage. He intended to rip the microphone from my hands and smash the tablet. He never made it. David materialized from the edge of the stage, stepping into his path. He stood there, an immovable wall of forensic certainty. I suggest you stop moving, David said, his voice dropping into a professional register. Assaulting a key witness to your wire fraud in front of 100 people is a terrible decision. Thomas halted, his chest heaving with impotent rage. You think you have won, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at David. I have lawyers on retainer who will crush you. David checked his watch. It is currently 4:15. Exactly 15 minutes ago, the Federal Bureau of Investigation received an encrypted digital dossier. It contains your IP logs, forged authorization recordings, and the routing pathway you used to launder money through a shell company. It is a federal offense. The remaining color drained from my father's face. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his smartphone, and frantically opened his banking application. I suggest you try logging into your wealth management portal, David continued. The authorities requested an immediate freeze on all connected assets. You have no lawyers on retainer anymore, Thomas. You have nothing. Thomas stared at his phone. The bright red error message glaring back at him confirmed his total financial paralysis. He dropped the phone onto the grass, a ruined, broken man. While my father faced his destruction, a completely different execution took place near the floral tunnel. Leo was in a state of blind panic. He abandoned a sobbing Rachel near the catering tent and sprinted across the patio toward Naomi. Naomi stood near the infinity pool, holding her glass of water with perfectly steady hands. Naomi! Please! Leo begged, his voice cracking as he grabbed her forearms. You have to listen to me. Gemma is crazy. She hacked those documents because she is jealous. The baby is not mine. Let us go home and talk. Naomi looked down at the hands desperately gripping her sleeves. She simply let him hold on, allowing him to feel a second of hope before she deliberately extracted her arms from his grasp. Go home, Naomi repeated, her voice smooth and utterly lethal. You do not have a home, Leo. Leo blinked rapidly, his face contorting in confusion. Of course I do. Our house. Naomi reached into her pristine designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She pressed it firmly against Leo's chest until his reflexive instincts forced him to take it. I own the house, Leo, Naomi stated clearly. It was purchased through my revocable trust before we were married. The luxury cars are leased under my medical corporation. The joint account you used to fund your mistress holds exactly $100. Leo stared at the envelope in his hands, his breathing shallow. He tore open the flap. The bold, terrifying legal header of a Supreme Court divorce petition stared back at him. As of 2 hours ago, Naomi continued, my private security team packed every single personal item you own into garbage bags. They moved your entire existence into a storage unit on the industrial side of the city. The unit is prepaid for 30 days. The access key is in that envelope. If you ever step foot on my property again, my armed guards will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. You cannot do this to me! Leo cried out in sheer desperation. We are married! I have rights to half of our assets. You cannot leave me with nothing. We signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement, Naomi reminded him with a chilling smile. An agreement that explicitly includes a ruinous infidelity clause, because Gemma and David provided me with the certified medical receipts proving your biological contributions to Rachel. That clause is fully triggered. You get nothing, Leo, not a single dime. Leo stumbled backward as if physically struck. He looked wildly around the yard, realizing for the first time in his pampered life that there was absolutely no one left to bail him out. He turned toward our mother Barbara, who was hyperventilating near the ruined dessert table. Naomi followed his gaze and delivered her final devastating blow. And as for being nothing but a wallet, Naomi said, her eyes flashing with brilliant intelligence as she stared directly at my mother. This wallet is permanently closed. Good luck funding your golden boy's lifestyle with frozen assets and a looming federal indictment. Naomi did not wait for a response. She turned on her heel and walked gracefully across the patio. The few remaining guests literally parted to let her through. She did not look back once as she exited through the wrought iron gates, leaving the wreckage of Leo's life scattered behind her. Rachel, realizing the sheer magnitude of her own ruin, dropped to her knees on the manicured grass. Thomas, fix this, she wailed, clutching her stomach. You promised me I was secure. You promised the house was paid for. The house was bought with stolen federal funds, Rachel David announced, turning his clinical gaze toward her. The bank will foreclose on this property immediately to recoup the stolen assets. You have about 30 days before the federal eviction notice is nailed to your front door. I suggest you start packing. I stood beside my husband on the main stage, looking down at the smoking ruins of the family who tried to break me. Thomas stared blankly at the grass. Barbara sobbed hysterically into her hands. Leo clutched his divorce papers, a homeless, penniless fraud. I hit a button on my tablet. The massive screen went black. The party was officially over. David and I walked to our vehicle in absolute silence, the chaotic aftermath of the ruined garden party fading behind us. We drove away from the silent, stunned property, leaving Rachel weeping on the manicured lawn, and my father staring blankly at a frozen banking screen. The rest of the weekend passed in a state of surreal, quiet calm for us. But for the Watson family, it was a rapidly ticking time bomb. Monday morning arrived with ruthless precision. At exactly 6 a.m, a fleet of dark sport utility vehicles rolled into my parents' exclusive gated suburban community. The federal agents did not knock politely or wait for an invitation. They executed the search warrant with swift, overwhelming, and highly visible force. Neighbors who had happily sipped champagne at the disastrous gender reveal party just 2 days prior now peeked through their custom plantation blinds. They watched eagerly as the final humiliating act of Thomas Watson's grand corporate play unfolded right on their pristine street. Agents swarmed the sprawling property. They systematically carried out dozens of heavy cardboard boxes filled with decades of financial records. They seized the desktop computers from my father's home office, confiscated personal laptops, and secured multiple encrypted hard drives. Thomas was pulled directly from his bed and forced to sit in his grand living room while the agents meticulously searched his property. Even in the face of federal authority, his monumental ego refused to yield. He tried to invoke his wealth and status, shouting at the armed agents about his high-powered lawyers and his influential country club connections. The agents remained completely unfazed by his entitled tantrums. They calmly read him his Miranda rights, placed his wrists in heavy steel handcuffs, and escorted him out the front double doors, in full view of the entire affluent neighborhood. Barbara watched the entire scene unfold in absolute horror. She stood shivering in her expensive silk robe as her pristine public image was publicly, irrevocably slaughtered. She screamed at the federal agents, threatening them with massive lawsuits that she would never be able to afford. The raid was clinical, methodical, and completely devastating to the facade my parents had spent a lifetime building. By noon, the news of the arrest leaked to the local business press, sending shockwaves through the commercial real estate sector. Thomas was formally indicted on multiple felony counts, including federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and unauthorized access of a corporate entity. True to his arrogant nature, he immediately hired the most aggressive, high-priced criminal defense attorneys in the city. He fully expected them to wave a magic legal wand, leverage his business contacts, and make the charges quietly disappear. But he vastly underestimated the lethal perfection of David's forensic accounting. The digital dossier we had submitted was an impenetrable fortress of hard data. During the initial discovery phase, the federal prosecutors laid out their entire arsenal on a long conference table. They presented the verified digital signatures, the time-stamped server logs, and the exact Internet Protocol addresses, tracing the fraudulent wire transfer directly back to my father's personal home network. The final crushing blow was the recorded verbal authorization from the bank manager, clearly featuring Thomas utilizing a fake emergency to bypass my company's strict dual authentication protocols. There was absolutely no gray area, no room for reasonable doubt, and no possible scapegoat to blame. The elite defense attorney sat Thomas down in a sterile, windowless interrogation room and delivered a brutal, uncompromising reality check. They explicitly told him the federal evidence was completely airtight. If he stubbornly chose to take the case to a public jury trial, he would undoubtedly face the absolute maximum penalty under federal sentencing guidelines, along with a highly publicized, deeply humiliating media circus that would ruin whatever tiny fraction of his reputation remained. They strongly advised him to swallow his pride, admit his guilt, and accept a formal plea deal, facing mandatory minimum sentencing and the terrifying prospect of a decade behind bars. Thomas's towering arrogance finally spectacularly collapsed. He pled guilty to the federal wire fraud charges. The presiding judge showed absolutely zero leniency for a wealthy, privileged man who intentionally stole $250,000 from his own daughter's business to secretly fund an illicit affair for his unemployed son. The court recognized the malicious, calculated nature of the theft. Thomas was formally sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary. Furthermore, the judge ordered immediate and full financial restitution to my event planning company. This legal mandate was the exact mechanism that triggered the final phase of my father's total ruin. Because Thomas had foolishly tied up the vast majority of his liquid assets in highly speculative commercial real estate investments and had spent years quietly funding Leo's lavish, unearned lifestyle, he simply could not produce the $250,000 in cash. The strict federal restitution order forced him into total, unmitigated bankruptcy. The financial institutions descended like vultures upon a carcass. The banks immediately seized his remaining commercial real estate holdings to satisfy outstanding corporate debts. They seized the fleet of luxury vehicles parked in the driveway. And most devastatingly for my mother's fragile ego, they officially seized the sprawling suburban estate she prized above all else. The grand Watson family empire was completely ruthlessly liquidated to satisfy the massive legal debts and federal fines. Thomas traded his custom-tailored Italian suits and expensive scotch for a standard-issue prison uniform. He was stripped of his title, his wealth, and his freedom, locked away in a federal facility where his country club memberships meant absolutely nothing. He left his wife to face the brutal, unforgiving social fallout entirely alone. The elite community they had courted for decades instantly and completely turned their backs. Barbara was forced to watch her kingdom crumble into dust, her status entirely eradicated by the very greed and deception she had actively encouraged. The mighty Watson patriarch had fallen, and his destruction was absolute. The mighty Watson patriarch had fallen, and his destruction was absolute. While my father traded his tailored suits for a federal prison uniform, Rachel discovered just how quickly a stolen suburban fairy tale could become a nightmare. Because the $1.2 million estate was purchased using fraudulent funds routed directly from my corporate account, the entire real estate transaction was legally nullified. The bank seized the property immediately to satisfy the federal restitution order. Rachel received a harsh knock on her custom mahogany front door just 2 weeks after the disastrous gender reveal party. Federal agents handed her a formal eviction notice, granting her exactly 14 days to vacate the premises entirely. Rachel had spent months parading around that massive house, decorating the nursery with imported Italian cribs and hand-painted murals. She fully expected to live her life as suburban royalty financed completely by my stolen labor. Instead, she found herself heavily pregnant, frantically stuffing her designer maternity clothes into cheap cardboard boxes she had to beg from a local grocery store. The bank froze all the holding accounts associated with the property. Without my father's stolen money to cover the exorbitant property taxes, the utility bills, and the luxury landscaping fees, the estate quickly lost its polished shine. The electricity was shut off. The pristine infinity pool turned murky. Rachel sat in the dark, sweltering in the summer heat, realizing that stealing my brother meant absolutely nothing without my money to fund him. Leo experienced an even more brutal awakening. After Naomi handed him the divorce petition and the storage unit key at the party, he arrogantly assumed he could just charm his way out of the situation. He honestly believed Naomi would calm down after a few days and beg him to come home. He drove away from the party in his luxury sports car, completely oblivious to the fact that the vehicle was legally leased under Naomi's medical corporation. Less than 48 hours later, a relentless repossession team tracked the vehicle using its internal GPS. They arrived at his cheap motel and towed the car away in the middle of the night. The golden boy woke up stranded, holding a set of useless keys, possessing exactly $100 to his name. With no car and his credit cards declining every single transaction, Leo was forced to take a public bus to the industrial edge of the city. He walked into the bleak, fluorescent-lit storage facility and found exactly what Naomi had promised. His entire privileged existence had been unceremoniously shoved into heavy-duty black garbage bags. There were no custom wardrobe boxes. His designer shoes, his imported cologne, and his collection of expensive bourbon were all jumbled together in plastic sacks normally used for yard waste. He sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit and finally realized the terrifying permanence of his situation. Naomi was never coming back. The prenuptial agreement was entirely bulletproof. He had forfeited millions of dollars in shared marital assets for a fleeting affair, and he was now completely destitute, desperate, and out of options. Leo dragged 2 garbage bags of his belongings onto another public bus and headed straight to Rachel's house. He expected to find a sanctuary, a place where he could regroup and figure out a new strategy to extract money from our parents. Instead, he arrived at a dark, sweltering house and a furious, panicking mistress. Their relationship was entirely built on the illusion of wealth. Without Naomi's massive neurosurgeon salary and my father's stolen funds to sustain them, Leo and Rachel immediately turned on each other like starved animals. Rachel screamed at Leo, demanding to know how he planned to support her and their unborn child, now that his parents were bankrupt and his wife had financially decapitated him. Leo yelled back, blaming Rachel for getting pregnant and demanding the extravagant house that ultimately exposed the entire wire fraud scheme. The bitter reality of their poverty poisoned every interaction. They spent their days trapped in the dark, echoing halls of the foreclosed mansion, fighting over the few dollars they had left for basic groceries. When the federal deadline arrived, the bank sent a lockout team to secure the property. Leo and Rachel were escorted off the premises by armed guards standing on the sidewalk, with nothing but a few suitcases and a profound sense of mutual hatred. With absolutely nowhere else to go, the golden child tried to seek refuge with the one person who had always shielded him from the consequences of his actions. Leo showed up at the cramped, dingy apartment Barbara had been forced to rent on the undesirable outskirts of the city. My mother had just lost her husband to a federal penitentiary and her entire social standing to a public scandal. She was bitter, exhausted, and deeply resentful of the son who had been the catalyst for her spectacular downfall. When Leo knocked on her door, expecting open arms and a warm meal, Barbara looked at him with sheer disgust. The toxic dynamic that had defined our family finally consumed itself. Barbara blamed Leo for Thomas's incarceration. She told him that his inability to keep his hands to himself had cost her the country club, the mansion, and her pristine reputation. She allowed him to sleep on her lumpy sofa for exactly 3 nights before the screaming matches became too volatile. Barbara explicitly told her precious golden son that he was a profound disappointment and ordered him to leave forever. Rachel, facing impending motherhood with absolutely zero financial support, was forced to swallow her pride and move back to her home state. She squeezed into her disappointed parents' spare bedroom far away from the elite suburban life she had tried to steal. Leo was left entirely alone. The man who had once mocked my work ethic and coasted through life on a wave of unearned privilege was forced to accept a minimum wage job as a night shift supervisor at a local retail store just to afford a miserable studio apartment. His ruin was thorough, absolute, and completely self-inflicted. 3 months after Leo packed his miserable life into garbage bags, the final pathetic echo of the Watson family dynasty arrived at my front doorstep. A harsh winter storm was battering our neighborhood, rattling the heavy glass windows of our home. David and I were sitting comfortably by the fireplace in our living room going over the expansion plans for my second corporate branch. The business had surged since the court-ordered restitution replenished my accounts, and we were reviewing commercial real estate options. The sudden shrill chime of our security gate intercom shattered the quiet warmth of our evening. It was nearly 11 at night. David immediately pulled up the high-definition camera feed on his tablet. He frowned, his forensic mind instantly assessing the unexpected variable on the screen. Standing in the freezing rain, pressing the intercom button with frantic, shaking fingers was my mother. Barbara wore a thin, outdated trench coat that offered no protection against the bitter wind. Her signature blonde highlights had grown out into a dull, flat gray plastered against her skull by the relentless rain. The designer handbags, the diamond tennis bracelets, and the expensive pearl necklaces were completely gone. She had pawned off every single luxury item months ago to pay for Thomas's failed legal defense. She looked like a hollow ghost of the arrogant socialite who used to sip champagne while plotting my financial ruin. David looked at me wordlessly, offering to call the private security patrol to have her removed. I shook my head gently, placing my hand over his. This was a confrontation I needed to handle personally to close the final chapter of my life. I put on my heavy winter coat, grabbed a large umbrella, and walked down the long cobblestone driveway to meet her at the wrought iron gate. I kept the heavy steel bars securely locked between us. "Gemma, please open the gate," Barbara begged, her voice cracking over the loud sound of the pouring rain. "I have absolutely nowhere else to go. The landlord is threatening to evict me from that awful apartment by the end of the week. I cannot live like this anymore. It is too cold, and I am entirely alone. You are trespassing on private property." "Barbara," I replied, my voice completely flat, totally devoid of any daughterly warmth or sudden pity. "I am your mother," she cried, gripping the cold iron bars with her bare hands. "You cannot just leave me out here in the freezing rain. Thomas is locked away in a federal cell. Leo will not even return my phone calls. He is working night shifts at a grocery store, Gemma. Your own brother is stocking shelves just to buy ramen noodles. We have lost absolutely everything. You are the only one who has the resources to fix this. You have to help us." I stood under my umbrella, watching the water run down her desperate, aging face. I felt absolutely zero sympathy. I only saw the ruthless woman who had happily authorized the theft of $250,000 from my hard-working employees to buy a sprawling mansion for her son's mistress. "I do not have to do anything," I stated, my words cutting through the storm, like shards of glass. "You chose your family the exact day you decided my business was nothing but a slush fund to cover up your golden boy's infidelity. You chose Rachel. You chose to treat Naomi like a disposable automated teller machine. You made your bed, Barbara. Now you have to sleep in it. We made a mistake. She sobbed, her cheap mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. We were just trying to protect the family name. We wanted a grandson. Is it a crime to want a legacy? It is literally a federal crime, I reminded her coldly. That is exactly why your husband is wearing a standard-issue prison uniform. But your real crime was your absolute lack of basic morality. You looked at my sister-in-law, a brilliant woman who funded your entire lavish lifestyle, and you called her a defective wallet. You looked at me, your own daughter, and decided my life's work was entirely disposable. You did not want a legacy. You wanted a shiny prop to show off to your wealthy country club friends. Barbara shook the gate, her desperation briefly flashing into a pathetic, grasping anger. You have your money back. The federal courts gave you the full restitution. Your business is thriving while we are starving in the streets. You have more than enough money to lend me a few $1,000s to secure a decent apartment. You owe me for raising you. I owe you absolutely nothing, I said, stepping closer to the gate, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. Every single dollar I have, I earned through my own blood and sweat. You never supported my business. You called my career a foolish hobby right up until the exact moment you needed to steal from it to save Leo. You are not standing here because you are genuinely sorry for betraying me. You are standing here because the bank took your country club membership and you have run out of gullible people to manipulate. Please, Gemma, she whimpered, abandoning the brief flash of anger and dropping her head against the wet iron bars. I am begging you. Just a small loan, just enough to get me back on my feet. I promise I will pay you back. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize to Naomi. I will do anything. I looked at the pathetic, shivering woman who used to terrorize me with her impossible standards. The matriarch who had demanded perfection while orchestrating massive fraud was completely broken. This was the public reckoning, brought to its final, miserable conclusion in the dark. Do you remember the text messages you sent to Rachel? I asked, my tone dropping into a deadly quiet register. The ones we broadcasted on the 50-foot screen to your entire elite social circle. You told Rachel she was the real family now. You told her I was just an ungrateful obstacle standing in the way of your perfect bloodline. Barbara squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing harder, entirely unable to defend herself against her own written words. Well, I continued, taking a deliberate step back from the gate. I highly suggest you go find your real family, because the woman standing in front of you is simply the chief executive officer of a company you actively tried to defraud. And this company does not issue personal loans to the desperate associates of convicted felons. Gemma, no, she screamed as I turned my back on her. You cannot do this. I am your mother. You lost the right to call yourself my mother the day you stole my future to fund your lies, I called over my shoulder, keeping my posture perfectly straight. If you ring this intercom again, I will have my security team arrest you for trespassing. I walked back up the long, well-lit driveway, my steps steady and sure. I did not turn around when she started sobbing loudly and begging against the iron gate. I did not hesitate when the winter wind howled through the barren trees. I walked back into the warmth of my beautiful, secure home, locked the heavy front door securely, and returned to my husband. David looked up from the commercial blueprints on the coffee table, raising a questioning eyebrow. I simply smiled, poured myself a fresh cup of tea, and sat down comfortably beside him. I took a slow sip, savoring the rich flavor, and leaned my head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me, knowing without asking that the final ghost of my past had been permanently exorcised. The storm raged violently outside, but inside my fortress, there was nothing but absolute, unshakable peace. The Watson family debt was officially paid in full. 2 years passed since that freezing, stormy night. The brutal winter that marked the absolute end of the Watson family dynasty eventually gave way to a series of incredibly bright, prosperous springs. I never saw my mother again after she walked away from my security gate. I never received another phone call from Leo, and my father remained securely locked behind the reinforced concrete walls of a federal penitentiary. The utter silence they left behind was not a void. It was an expansive, beautiful canvas that I used to paint a masterpiece of a life. The $250,000 in court-ordered restitution did not just stabilize my luxury event planning company, it acted as high-octane rocket fuel for massive, unprecedented expansion. I took that recovered capital and immediately opened a second corporate branch in a neighboring state, targeting an entirely new demographic of elite clientele. Within 18 months, my revenue tripled. We secured exclusive vendor contracts that completely monopolized the high-end corporate gala market in the region. I no longer just planned parties for the wealthy. I dictated the absolute standard for luxury entertainment. I had transformed the very business my parents once mocked as a frivolous hobby into a commanding multi-million-dollar corporate empire. David thrived right alongside me. His meticulous, lethal forensic accounting on my father's wire fraud case caught the direct attention of federal regulators and the senior partners at his financial firm. They realized they had an absolute apex predator in their ranks. David was rapidly promoted to the director of complex fraud investigations. He now spearheaded a massive department dismantling corporate embezzlement rings and white-collar criminals with the exact same cold mathematical precision he used to protect our family. We became an untouchable partnership, completely insulated by our mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. But the most spectacular, triumphant transformation belonged to Naomi. Once the parasitic weight of my brother was legally and permanently surgically excised from her life, Naomi became an absolute force of nature. Without Leo constantly draining her finances, manipulating her schedule, and demanding her exhausted attention, she channeled her fierce, brilliant intellect entirely into her medical career. She pioneered a groundbreaking, minimally invasive spinal surgery technique that garnered national medical acclaim. Her hospital board recognized her unparalleled dedication and unmatched skill. Less than a year after she finalized her brutal, flawless divorce, Naomi was officially promoted to chief of neurosurgery. It was a historic, monumental achievement for a brilliant African-American woman in a heavily male-dominated field. She shattered the glass ceiling into a million pieces and walked right over it in designer heels. We decided to celebrate her historic promotion on a warm, perfect Saturday afternoon in our own backyard. It was not a performative, grotesque display of stolen wealth like the gender reveal party my parents had attempted to throw. There were no rented petting zoos, no imported floral tunnels, and absolutely no fake shallow country club friends judging our every move. We hosted a genuinely intimate, beautiful gathering. We invited the people who had stood by us when the world was burning. David grilled steaks on the patio. The air smelled of wood smoke and rich food. Laughter, real, uninhibited laughter, echoed across the green lawn. Naomi arrived looking like absolute royalty, wearing a stunning yellow sundress that perfectly complemented her radiant, stress-free smile. She walked straight across the grass and gently took my 6-month-old daughter from my arms. David and I had welcomed our first child the previous autumn. Holding my tiny, perfect daughter, I had made a silent, ironclad vow that she would never ever know the toxic conditional love that had poisoned my own childhood. She would never be measured against a golden child, and she would never be taught that her worth was tied to her compliance. Naomi rocked my baby girl gently, her surgical hands holding the tiny infant with incredible tenderness. My daughter reached up, grasping Naomi's finger and giggling brightly. I watched the two of them, my heart expanding with a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude. Naomi was not related to me by blood. The legal document tying her to my family had been shredded and burned in a divorce court. Yet she was the greatest sister I could have ever asked for. She was the godmother to my child, a permanent, fiercely loyal fixture in our lives. Standing there in the sunlight, surrounded by my brilliant husband, my beautiful daughter, and my triumphant sister-in-law. The final ultimate lesson of my entire ordeal crystallized perfectly in my mind. Society constantly feeds us a dangerous, archaic lie. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are conditioned to believe that sharing DNA mandates absolute loyalty, endless forgiveness, and perpetual sacrifice. We are brainwashed into thinking that we must tolerate disrespect, exploitation, and even criminal betrayal simply because the people hurting us happen to hold the title of mother, father, or brother. It is a toxic myth designed to keep victims chained to their abusers. True family is not a biological accident. True family is an active daily choice. Family is defined by the people who celebrate your success without a shred of jealousy. It is the people who refuse to use your business as a personal slush fund. It is the people who stand like a brick wall between you and the individuals trying to destroy you. Family is built entirely on a foundation of mutual respect, absolute honesty, and unconditional support. My parents and my brother shared my blood, but they were nothing more than greedy, opportunistic strangers. David and Naomi were my true family. We had built an impenetrable fortress of peace completely free from the ghosts of my past. The Watson dynasty had collapsed under the weight of its own pathetic arrogance, leaving behind a group of broke, miserable people who had completely destroyed each other. I had walked away from the wreckage completely unharmed and built an empire of my own. If you are watching this and you are currently exhausted from carrying the weight of toxic family members who use you, diminish you, and demand your blind loyalty while offering you absolutely nothing but betrayal in return, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You have the absolute power to walk away. You have every right to protect your peace, your assets, and your sanity. Do not ever let guilt keep you anchored to a sinking ship. You do not owe your life to people who only view you as a resource. Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line and cut off toxic family members to save yourself? How did you finally find the courage to walk away and build your own chosen family? Share your stories in the comments below. Let us continue building a strong community that celebrates breaking generational cycles and refusing to tolerate abuse. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell for more stories of resilience, justice, and the courage to choose yourself over toxic blood. Thank you for watching, and always remember your true worth is never determined by those who are too blind to see it.